Hello and welcome back to the Replatform podcast, which today is with just me, Paul, as Lewis and I wanted to do it after 5 p.m, which didn't work for James. But yeah, I'm joined by Lewis Sellers, who is a very good friend of mine, and we're both finding it quite difficult to be serious so far. I think this is take 5. Just because we've known each other for so long. But James and I invited Lewis on when we saw him recently to talk a bit about Magento and I guess kind of how it's changed in recent times, how the role of the platform has changed at the kind of varying levels of online retail. So Lewis, why don't you give us a bit of an introduction to yourself and Pinpoint initially before we go into the questions?
Yeah, brilliant. Thanks very much. So I'm Lewis Sellers, Managing Director of Pinpoint, who are a Magento and Adobe commerce agency based in Leeds, Manchester and London. We're part of a larger group called IDHL. So we've got kind of 9 agencies in total. We were acquired a few years ago, but I head up the Adobe commerce part of the business.
Lovely. And so the first question, which I think is the one that a lot of people tend to ask at the moment. So you and I have a lot of discussions around Magento and the market fit, and we've debated a bit over the last few years around this, and what customer type Magento is suited to nowadays. Where do you think Magento sits, and where is it still the right platform?
Yeah, so I think from my perspective, anything that's kind of complex B2C is definitely still a good fit for Magento. We see a lot of customers coming in from a B2B perspective now. So I would say if I look back 3 or 4 years ago compared to now, we're definitely seeing a lot more dominance in the B2B market. Anyone who's looking at kind of international stores, multi-store, Magento is still very good at handling kind of lots of complexity around that area. And also companies that want to kind of be in control of their own data as well. So obviously a lot of the SaaS platforms, you throw your data into there and they kind of host it on their own infrastructure where you still have the ability to host on premise. So they're probably the main areas we're kind of seeing growth in at the moment. That being said, we do see that people are needing to have more of a healthy budget to invest in something like Adobe now. Obviously, I think we'll probably talk about this as we kind of go on the upgrade path. It's a lot more onerous than it previously has been. So it's kind of 2 trade-offs. But yeah, complex B2C and B2B are the main growth areas that we see. That
makes sense. And when I was working with Magento a lot more, and when we, both of us were pretty much all of our projects with Magento, I remember, almost every project was on-prem, and you just mentioned that around, the potential of still using it on-prem. But in my recent experience, it feels like everyone's using the cloud edition now. What proportion of your projects are using cloud, and what's your view on cloud, Jeff?
Yeah, good question. I think probably 50-50 now. We're definitely seeing more customers adopt cloud than what they previously did do. It's probably fair to say when cloud was first launched, it didn't have the greatest reputation. And I think that Adobe have probably had quite a steep learning curve with this. They definitely put a lot of investment in the team behind the scenes. But we do have clients now that are using cloud really successfully. We've got people like Leeds United Football Club that are on there. And they go through huge traffic peaks, and the cloud functionalities worked really well for them. But yeah, probably about 50% of our customers are on there now. Slightly different to work with than the on-premise version because it's a read-only environment. So there are a few nuances that you have to be aware of, but we've done kind of plenty of projects there now and kind of used to the quirks that it has.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think it's definitely got a lot better from what I've seen with clients for sure. Yeah. And then I guess the obvious main kind of point of criticism for Magento is the maintenance costs, so both in terms of time and money. Equally, though, I know this can be brought down, if you adopt the right I guess, or if you go in with the right mentality and adopt the right principles with Magento. What's your view in terms of how people can keep this to a minimum?
Yeah, so most of the time we'd say keep your technical debt as low as possible. So don't build everything into the platform. I think this has probably been something that we see a lot of people fall into the trap of. So utilize third parties where you can and kind of integrate them through the API or using kind of third party functionality for that. Only extend the kind of core code base with so there's a huge extension. There's a huge provider of extensions out there. A lot of those extensions add 100 features to the code base, but in reality, you might only need 1 or 2 of those. And rather than just buying extensions from all over the place and adding them into your site, we would recommend only extending it by the one piece of functionality you do, just to keep that technical debt down. Ultimately means that the maintenance of the platform is much easier. You don't end up with conflicts between the extensions all of the time. And then really using Magento as a kind of a core sales platform, and then utilizing third parties to build off that core where possible.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think there have been some really good examples of large sites that have done that really well, actually. So before, obviously not now, but before Made.com was like the perfect example of where Magento was essentially, cart and order management, and then they had a PIM, they went headless. Yeah, everything.
Yeah, we're seeing Akinio as a PIM. You might offload your search technology, all of those other areas, and just utilizing Magento really to handle that sales function and maybe some of the other bits, but offloading that where you can in order to keep that kind of upgrade path as straightforward as possible.
That makes sense. And I guess similar-ish area here. So what's your view on kind of building within Magento versus outside, but more when it comes to kind of core functionality that's needed as part of the e-com site? So examples I've written down here, so pre-order management or VIP management. So yeah, over the years, I've seen lots of people build custom modules for this kind of stuff within Magento, and then that has hampered them further down the line when it comes to, I guess, upgradability, maintenance, all of that kind of stuff. Versus potentially nowadays, it feels like a lot of people are building like microservices completely independent of Magento, and then just, using APIs or, other ways of kind of connecting into Magento. What's your view on how this should work?
Yeah, I think there's probably a bit of a balance to strike on this side. Like typically we would say offload this out of Magento and try and build outside where you can. Kind of keeping Magento as that sales engine, building the logic outside of it, connecting to the API. I think Magento is a hugely kind of powerful platform out of the box. So really it's using parts of the platform that are available to you and then using the API to kind of achieve that functionality, as it were. So Leeds United that I mentioned before, they have kind of I think you mentioned VIP, like management solution. So they have season ticket holders can receive discounts for certain types of products. We use the customer group functionality within Magento, so straight out the box functionality where they can set pricing on a per product basis for those customers. And then we have an interface with a platform called SeatGeek. And I think there's another service as well. And basically when customers subscribe to be a season ticket holder, they get added to a specific customer group in Magento, and that gives them access to those level of details. So I think it's all about, I guess, using your agency where you can to leverage the capabilities of Magento and then figuring out how you can do that in the most efficient way. Back in the day, we might have built that as a huge extension within the platform that kind of overwrote something that isn't really required now. So yeah, just being smart about that kind of method really, and keeping it as lean as possible.
That makes sense. And then you mentioned lead search. I think, having spoke to you about, and I think it's probably right to say this, hopefully, I think they're, a good example of a pretty complex Magento implementation. They've got relatively low kind of maintenance and OpEx costs around the platform. I guess, how can brands have Magento? What else can they do to keep the costs down, essentially? What else can they do to reduce kind of wasted spend around kind of the maintenance retainers and, all other aspects of kind of maintenance around Magento?
Yeah, so Magento's long-standing platform. There's loads of out-of-the-box features. I think the amount of times we do see people re-implement features is absolutely crazy. So even back to the days of Magento 1, we used to see people re-implement color swatches, even though they came completely out of the box. I think it's about being smart with your initial build. So if you can build components within the page builder functionality, so this is the kind of drag and drop page editor where you can add widgets and various other bits. I think it's about being smart with building out those reusable components so you can give the site kind of a different look and feel as you were. That means that the general day-to-day maintenance is quite easy for a company to handle. I think going back to one of the previous points, keeping that code base really lean. Don't add in extensions that are going to be adding 100 features when you only need one. that means that when you are getting to doing upgrades, those upgrades progress much easier. You're not having to go through kind of weeks and weeks and weeks of work of just doing an upgrade and not really getting too much from it. And I think really so probably more than 50% of the clients that we onboard are people where we're almost recovering a site that they've had built from another agency, or it's people that are kind of moving provider. We have kind of a 3-stage approach for that. So we carry out an audit initially to understand the kind of the quality of the code base and any issues they might have around kind of stability or maintenance of it. We will then stabilize the platform by re-implementing anything that might be not up to the right standards or needs removing or anything like that. And then you get onto the fun stuff, which is the iterative improvements, actually building the functionality you want and bits like that. And what we always try and get across to the clients that we're working with is, if you do have a large amount of technical debt in the platform, you'd be better kind of pausing a little bit and taking a step back in order to clean all that up, because moving forward, you'll be able to progress a lot quicker rather than trying to figure it out as you go along. You're better kind of getting back to a really stable code base in the first place.
That makes sense. So the next one, so we had this conversation a couple of weeks ago, and I was moaning to you about a client basically had been quoted somewhere between 40 and 50 grand to do the 2.4 upgrade. And that had essentially triggered them, because it was, an unexpected cost. It triggered them to think, right, I'm just going to take this and use that as a justification to put 50k towards the replatforming away from Magento. And I guess in my experience, the upgrades are usually one of the first trigger points to kind of start people looking at the SaaS platforms or any other platform, because, I guess it's a bit of an unknown. You don't know when the next one is. You're frustrated. It's something that you probably haven't budgeted for. And there's a lot of unnecessary replatforms that have maybe initially been triggered by this. So I guess from your perspective, do you think that Magento will take this into the kind of platform as a service offering at any point? Do you think it's something they're going to address? And how would you, I guess, as an agency, like to see them address this?
Yeah, I've been mulling this over a bit since we originally discussed it. I'm not convinced that I keep saying Magento, it should be Adobe Commerce now, shouldn't it? But I'm not convinced they'll ever go full platform as a service. I think it's quite a big shift away from where they currently are. And whilst it might be a sensible move in certain areas, I think they would almost suffer as a result of going that route. Like, a lot of people still come to it because it is a fully open source platform on that side, and I guess it would be taking away a little bit from that by going full pass. There's definitely a lot of talk around them moving more into a microservice approach for the platform, and almost making different elements of the platform, like being able to upgrade those independently. So if you wanted to upgrade search, you can independently do that separate to some other part of the platform, for example. I think they are trying to move more towards headless, which obviously leads more to that microservice approach as well, and more kind of component driven. But I would say the upgrade path, especially the 2.4 upgrade path from 2.3, has been very painful for a lot of merchants and for merchants and agencies. The upgrade to 2.4.2, I think it was designed to actually move them into a position where the upgrades moving forward should be a lot more straightforward. So that's a big area of focus for them at the moment. I think anyone who does choose to go down the route of Adobe Commerce has to realize that there is more of an overhead on upgrades and maintenance and bits like that than any of the SaaS platforms out there. Obviously, things like Magento and Big Commerce will upgrade seamlessly behind the scenes, and that's something that merchants do need to be aware of. But the trade-off is you do get a lot more flexibility within the platform. You get full ownership of the code and the customer base within there, and that's almost of a value to other merchants. So I guess going back to your original question, I don't think they will go full pass. I think the huge focus within the platform at the moment is on the upgrade path side of things, in order to try and make that kind of much more straightforward. And really, from our side, that's something that we would like to see. We really want our merchants to get the most out of being able to add new features, functionality, and delivering an ROI on the platform.
That makes sense. I think you mentioned that. I think if they could bring that overhead down and improve how they handle the comms around it, and maybe even like try to align upgrades with like tangible improvements, I think that would help them a lot, and it would essentially give people more reason to expect something off the back of it. So we've I guess both of us have been around since the kind of Magento 1 days, where when a patch was released, it would take an hour to install a patch, and then you would, however long your testing took on top of that, you might have anywhere from a few hours testing all the way up to a few days worth of testing. But at the moment, the upgrade path is definitely more painful. But I know that is a real key focus for Adobe at the moment, and something that they are working on. And I guess that's one of the negatives at the moment. There are plenty of positives in the platform too.
What is Amplience? In a word, it's freedom. The freedom to build a digital experience as limitless as your vision. Create, preview, schedule, and manage all your content in one easy place. Find out more at amplience.com. Amplience. Experience freedom.
So you kind of ruined the next question because you've already touched. There's obviously a lot of rumors around Magento kind of being completely re-architected. A lot of talk of Java being a big part of that. As you said, a lot of talk around them kind of moving more towards microservices. Do you have a view on kind of timelines for this and how much of a drastic change it will be?
No, not directly. So I think this is something that is actively happening in the background. I think it's going to be I think it was first deemed that it'd be like Magento 3 almost, and it'd be a new version that they were going to release that everyone had to move to. And I don't think that's the case. I think it's going to be an iterative change. And what we're going to see is as further updates come out to 2.4, hopefully we'll see that upgrade path get a bit easier. The upgrade to 2.5 will be another step in the right direction. So I think it's going to be a gradual change. I don't know off the top of my head what the roadmap plans are for 2.5. I know Adobe are a lot more transparent now on the when they are doing releases and what the end of life and bits like that will be. But I certainly don't think it's going to be a full rebuild of the whole platform, where to get to the next version, you need to completely rebuild your front end and everything else. I think it'll be more of a gradual change. But time will tell.
You would hope they've learned their lesson from that.
Yeah. Magento 2 was had a rocky start, let's say.
Yeah, that makes sense. And then the next one. So I'm not as close to Magento as I used to be, as you know. I guess just from like a high level, what is new with the platform? Like what came as part with, or kind of what's been within some of those 2.x upgrades? Like what else are they kind of working on at the moment? Like what's changed within the platform over the last kind of 12 months?
Yeah, so 2.4 was definitely related to security, changing a lot of core parts of the platform to aid that upgrade path. So we spent a fair amount of time talking around that. Is definitely a key focus. There's been a lot of updates relating to performance, especially in B2B and related to price lists. So B2B, as you'll know, there's huge customer catalogs, huge product catalogs, and then quite often individual customers will have individual prices. So you can end up with one product with thousands of prices associated with it. So there's been a lot of updates made to the platform around handling those larger product catalogs and customer level pricing. There's been quite a few other B2B functions, features that have rolled out. So I think there's live search from customer groups within B2B, quite a lot of updates to PWA Studio. So they've got the Vienna theme that they've been kind of constantly adding to, a lot of updates within GraphQL. And in the PWA side of things, they've also focused on bits like accessibility and making sure that things like the Vienna theme can be read by screen readers. And I think they've pulled out some like high contrast versions of the theme and bits like that as well. And then alongside that, they're kind of further aligning themselves with the Adobe suite of products. So I think they've rolled out Adobe Sign integration and some other bits that kind of roll them into the Adobe suite. We've had bits like Apple Pay out of the box. And then, largely that upgrade compatibility, they've rolled out a kind of an upgrade compatibility tool that says, if you're moving from 2.3.2 to 2.4.4, here are all the extensions we think are likely to break as a result of that. Here's where you need to be focusing your attention on. And that gives, I guess, us as an agency a better understanding of where we need to focus attention when we're carrying out those upgrades.
You mentioned PWA Studio there, which I think is always quite an interesting topic. And obviously, there was a lot of hype. We used to go to the Imagine conference in Vegas together every year. There was a lot of hype around that for a few years. And then, again, I'm not as close to Magento as I was, but I don't feel like you hear the same level of positivity or newness around that. What's your view on if you were to go headless, and I know your group does quite a lot with headless build, what would the stack look like? Would you build on top of PWA Studio, or would you go with a completely independent set of technologies?
Yeah, so we acquired Ampersand Commerce last year in December. They use PWA Studio as their kind of core underlying theme for headless implementations. So they have an accelerator product that they run on various sites, looking after companies like Selco and businesses like that. They're fundamentally using the PWA Studio. There's definitely a lot of internal IP that's been built on top of that as well. So we've kind of taken PWA Studio as a foundation and then built out things like a customized checkout and various other iterations on top of it. I think personally, from a personal perspective, and this is maybe slightly different, I always am a fan of building the framework that you run yourself and understanding it kind of intimately, as it were. So making sure, so we're building out our own framework that's built in React called Boilerplate. And that'll be our base theme that we use for all headless builds. From a group perspective on our side, we could have the same front end theme that could then interchange with things like Big Commerce or Shopify or Adobe Commerce or Commerce Tools or whatever other platforms we choose to kind of work with in the future. And it means that we understand everything within there. But I think that there's pros and cons to each of them. Hiver's obviously Hoover is getting a really good reputation in the industry at the moment for being a really solid platform that's got some great brains behind it and is progressing really well. You've got alternatives like Vue Storefront that's gained a lot of momentum. So I think there's pros and cons of each, no kind of right or wrong answer on that side.
I think, Hoover's definitely an interesting one. I've seen a few sites recently that are particularly impressive that have been built. Like a lot of the old school, or not old school, but some of the like Magento old guard devs on Twitter are particularly behind that. So yeah,
we've done quite a lot of proof of concept work with it behind the scenes, and we're looking at things like the checkout and because they have certain components that you can just kind of buy off the shelf on that side. But it's got a really good development team behind that, and I can see them doing really well with it.
Yeah, that makes sense. That'll be an interesting one to keep an eye on. Magento should just buy it, really, shouldn't they? And
maybe. They heard it here first.
Yeah. So next question. So there's 2 questions left. Magento's roadmap. So the next 12, 18 months, like what's coming next? What are you excited about with the platform and the kind of surrounding Adobe technology?
It's probably a bit sad to say, but I'm excited about them simplifying the upgrade path. I think that is going to be one of the big things on there. And I think at the moment, if you hear anything negative about Magento, it is purely that upgrade path and the fact that people feel like they're spending large amounts of money on doing those upgrades. So with that being such a key part of the issues, I think if they can solve that, it will almost kind of reignite some of the Magento industry on that side and allow them to focus on more of the kind of product rollout and adding lots of new functionality. So that's definitely something that we want to see progressing and kind of getting kind of regular updates on. Adobe do publish their product roadmap now, so most of its feature updates at the moment are related to kind of performance at high scale, as I mentioned, around things like B2B, or removing kind of old legacy functionality that's no longer used. But I think what we will see is them doubling down on B2B functionality. I would say probably 3-4 years ago, we would see one B2B opportunity for every 6 or 7 B2C opportunities. And now it's not quite flipped, but we definitely see like B2B is very prominent in the merchants that we're speaking to at the moment. Typically, customers that have like a B2C store and want to offer B2B as well. And then they might have international thrown into there as well. So I think that the B2B functionality build out will be something that's kind of key there, and quite exciting for growth, because it's a new market that they've not been in for that long, really, but they've established themselves as kind of a key player there. That's about it, really.
Yeah, I think B2B is really interesting, and I think one of the things that I've been most surprised by is that they haven't had more competition. So I think in terms of that mid-market space, like obviously Big Commerce is kind of challenging and they're winning quite a bit, and I'd imagine you're seeing them quite a lot, but there's not another like mainstream B2B focused platform, is there, that's kind of actually going to market with like a proper kind of proposition and ecosystem and a portfolio.
Yeah, exactly. And they're both gaining good reputation for different kind of slightly different styles almost. SaaS and open source are always going to have pros and cons between the two of them. There's kind of enough market share for both of them to compete and win in different areas. And I think one solution will work really well for one customer and one will work really well for another. So they've got a good B2B platform. There's not many, like you say, there's not many platforms out there that you can think of that have the feature set available within Magento in the B2B space. So I think it would be a sensible move for them to just continue and to kind of double down on that functionality and build it out further.
Makes sense. Last question, which you again have kind of answered, so I'm going to change it slightly. But I guess, so what would you, and you have answered this one, or this first half of the question, what would you like to see Magento do more of? And within your agency, like, what are some of the other things that you're, I guess, currently like investing time and money into, from like, I don't know, maybe R&D, or, you know, it could be headless, there might be, you know, other Adobe products. Like, where are you looking to kind of develop your Magento offering?
Yeah, so what I would like to see from Magento and Adobe, I guess, is the upgrade path solved. We've talked about that a lot. Continuing that B2B functionality further. I think outside of the actual platform and that side of things, I think a return of the events that they used to do. There used to be a kind of a real sense. We spoke about this a few weeks ago. There used to be such a sense of kind of community and involvement. And I've always been at the events. We've both spoken at events previously. We've had clients speak at events. The dev community in Magento is kind of obsessive around kind of developing the platform, and it's got a really good kind of community behind it. But since COVID's happened, a lot of those events have kind of fallen away, and obviously the SaaS platforms have seen quite a lot of growth there. But seeing things like Meet Magento UK earlier this year kind of brought back that community feel again, and I think it's good for the industry. It keeps the product kind of on its toes, and you get kind of merchants together and brainstorming and all that sort of thing. So I think a return to some more of those events and bits would be nice to see. Transparency around kind of product roadmap and the direction of the platform, I think, would be good as well. Adobe they do publish it, but they are quite quiet around some of the features that they're rolling out. But a bit of a step forward there would be good as well. And then really from a group perspective, headless is definitely something that we're kind of continuing to invest in. It's not for everyone. We definitely don't want to. There are a lot of companies out there that have rolled out headless builds and had a lot of problems post launch on that side. And we definitely want a really stable product that we can take to market for that. So Ampersand have done a lot of headless work now, so that's something that we're kind of keen to kind of progress with. R&D wise, we're looking at our own framework so we can kind of spread across different platforms. We want to, as a group, be almost a kind of platform agnostic. A client can kind of come to us. They don't necessarily need to know what the platform is that they're wanting to build on. We can kind of help with some of those bits. But fundamentally, we're looking at integration platforms. So we have our own iPaaS internally to manage the integrations between different systems, a headless framework, and then kind of diversifying our platform offerings. So at the moment, we offer Shopify, Magento, Kentico, and Braco, I think I've covered those. And then we're looking at Big Commerce at the moment as well, and potentially things like commerce tools. And really just being able to offer that agnostic approach. And then we're looking at other areas, so digital marketing, data, analytics. So yeah, exciting times at the moment. A lot of investment and a lot of growth in the group.
Great. Well, I think that covered all of my questions. And one thing I was going to agree with you on was it was very interesting going to meet Magento. Then I think it was a tube strike, train strike, and we both managed to get there. I think my expectations were fairly low given the challenges of getting around London, and there were over 700 people there, and it was absolutely buzzing. So yeah, I think that was quite interesting, and definitely shows that there's still some hype around Magento and there's still an ecosystem. But yeah, I agree, they need to bring people together a bit more and try and get around a bit of a reputation issue that they've still got, I think, from like Magento 2 and some of those early days, because it sounds like they are doing some interesting stuff, and particularly like you said, B2B is still very, very strong. So
100%. It's a great platform, and especially for international and multi-store and bits like that, there aren't that many platforms that handle that multi-store functionality in the way that Magento does, and it is very good at that side of things. But as we both know, when Magento 2 first came out, it did have a rocky start. Cloud wasn't ideal, and I think they've suffered a bit of reputation damage there. And those events are just a great way to get people back upbeat about the platform again and singing its kind of praises and getting it back out there. So we'll see what the next year has in store for us all.
Great. So thanks very much, Lewis, for coming on the podcast and talking about Magento. Really interesting episode. If people or listeners want to get in touch with you or find out more around kind of how you work or ask any questions around Magento, how should they get in touch with you?
So via our website, which is pinpointdesigns.co.uk, or alternatively can reach out on email. So my email's lewis.sellers, which is SELLERS, at idhl.co.uk. And I'm also on Twitter under Lewis Sellers. So any of those methods is fine.
Great. And thanks everyone for listening. As always, any likes or shares across the different podcast platforms and YouTube is gratefully appreciated. And then we'll be back next week with another episode, and James will be back, so it won't just be myself. So yeah, thanks again everyone, and I'll see you all soon.
Thanks for having me.
For more information on this topic, head over to replatform.fm for our audio podcasts. To discuss a project, or if you'd like to chat about any of the topics covered in this episode in more detail, please reach out to myself, James Gurd, or my co-host Paul Rogers via LinkedIn and Twitter. Thanks again for listening, and keep your ears peeled for the next episode.